I mentioned in my last video that subjects are extremely important. And the reason why they're important is because every single sentence of any language is going to include a subject within that sentence. And so today we're going to go a little bit more in depth on exactly what subjects are, and we're going to break down each of the Spanish subjects so that you understand how each of them work and exactly what's the deal with subjects in Spanish. So let's start with kind of what is a subject. A subject can be defined as someone or something that does the action of the sentence. You might remember that the action of a sentence is a verb. So let's take an example right here. We'll say, I speak Spanish. In this sentence, can you identify what the subject is? In this case, it would be I, because that is the person that is doing the action. Let's do another one. How about this? Let's say, it is running. What would be the subject here? Well, in this case, it would be it. It is the subject because it is the thing that is doing the action. It is running. And so, let's review all of kind of the different types of subjects. And then we'll get on to each of them in Spanish, and we'll explain some of the quirks about each one and exactly when you would use each one in what situation. So, let's start with all the different kinds of subjects. Now, there are 6 subject groups in linguistics. And so these can be broken down into kind of 2 categories. One is the type of quote unquote person that the subject is. And the second is whether it is singular or plural. So let's start with singular and plural. Singular versus plural. What do these both mean? If you can take a guess, singular means that there is just one. Just one. So an example of a singular subject would be I, could be you, could be Carl, could be it. All of these are singular subjects because there's only one person or thing that is going to be doing the action. And so you may have already guessed, but plural is going to mean more than one. So what's an example of a plural subject? Well, that would be they, we, you guys, maybe Tim and I. There are plenty of different plural subjects that we can have in which there are multiple people or things that are going to be doing the action. So now that we've broken it into singular versus plural, let's talk about the person forms. This refers to first person, second person, and third person. So a first person action, I want you to think kind of in terms of video games. I don't know how many of you guys out there play video games, but this may come a little easier if you play them. First person, in this case, a first person video game is when you're in the body of the person. And so essentially, this is going to be talking from one's own perspective. So what are some examples of first person subjects? That would be I or we. This would be first person plural right here, since you're still talking from your own perspective. There's just multiple people involved now. Once again, could be something like Tim and I. Essentially anything where someone is talking from their own perspective. Now, second person is going to be talking directly to someone or multiple people. So what would second person look like? Well, that would be perhaps you guys or or you or y'all. Essentially, any subject in which you are directly addressing someone or something. So, in this case, you would be an example of a second person singular subject, or you guys would be an example of a second person plural subject. So, now moving on to the last one, third person. This would be talking about someone or something indirectly. So you're not directly addressing this, but they're kind of out of the picture. So for example, this could be he or she or it or they. And so these would all be examples of third person subjects. Could also be, for instance, say Carl and Rob, all third person right there. And so these are all the different ways to break down subjects. So you have singular first person, singular second person, singular third person, and then you have plural first person, plural second person, and plural third person. And so let's talk about where this kind of relates to Spanish. So if we go down here, see I've organized a chart. And the way that charts are organized within Spanish, usually you'll see it in this form, right here, with the subjects aligned like this. And the reason why they're aligned in this specific manner, if you're already familiar with any of these subjects, is the fact that the ones that go straight down right here, these are going to be all the singular ones. The ones that go straight down right here, these are going to be all the plural ones. And then across from this way, this is first person. Across from this way, this is second person. And finally, across from this way, this is third person. So let's break down each of these subjects, what exactly they mean, and kind of when we would use them. So let's first start with translations of each of them. Yo. Yo means I. So anytime we say yo in Spanish, it's going to be I. Tu means you. And it can also be vos. Vos also means you. It's a lot less commonly used. So especially if you're in Spanish class, you're probably not going to be seeing a lot of vos. It's used a lot in places like Argentina. I lived in Colombia. I hear some people from there use it here and there. But it's a lot more scarcely used than tu. Usually when you're talking about you, you'll hear tu. Now let's talk about él. Él means him, or he, I should say. Ella means she. And usted's an interesting one right here. So usted actually means you, but it means you in a formal sense. So kind of the difference between tu versus usted would be that tu is very informal. So you use this in situations essentially where you're talking to, let's say, a good friend of yours, or maybe just an immediate family member, versus usted would be much more formal. You'd be talking to someone that commands respect, such as a boss, or let's say like an elder person, or usually for like strangers, it's used a lot as well. Can even be used as a term of endearment. When I lived in Colombia, they used usted with like their boyfriends and their girlfriends because it's used as a term of endearment. And so that's kind of the main difference between tu versus usted. I'll have another video kind of breaking it down into further depth if you'd like to go watch that. But yeah. And the reason why it's thrown right here in the third person plural, you think, well, usted, you're directly addressing someone, so it should be second person. And yes, it technically is a second person subject, but the reason why it's thrown into third person is because when we get into verb conjugations, it's always looped in with the él in the ea conjugations. And so if you haven't gotten to verb conjugations yet, don't worry about that too much. But for now, we're just going to throw it in third person. So now here we got nosotros and nosotras. These both mean we. And we'll discuss the difference between these in a minute. Vosotros and vosotras. Vosotras. Sticking with the theme, you could see that, this is second person plural, so this is going to mean you guys. It's commonly how we say it in Spanish, in English. Could also mean y'all, kind of depends on where you're from, what kind of English you speak. Or even you. Sometimes we say you directly addressing more than one person. So, for example, if I was talking to two of my friends and I said, you need to get it together, referring to both of them, that would be an example of where we translate that as vosotros or vosotras. However, there is one thing that I want to address. This is only in Spain. Only in Spain. And I believe the reason why is because when basically the people that came to the New World, the conquerors, when they came over, it somehow got lost. The people that brought the language either were not addressing themselves with vosotros. They were likely using ustedes, which we'll get into in a second. Or the people that were picking up on Spanish, the natives, they just completely lost vosotros. They only started using ustedes. And because of that, you'll only find this in Spain. So that's an important thing to know. Another thing, too, is in a lot of Spanish classes, vosotros is not used at all. And it's just because it's only in Spain. So there's no real reason to learn it, especially if you're learning Spanish in the United States, in which most people only communicate with Latino people if they're using Spanish at all. And so usually vosotros or vosotras not going to be using that a whole lot. And then finally, we got ellos and ellas and ustedes. So ellos and ellas, this is going to mean they. And finally, ustedes is going to mean you guys. If this were used in Spain, ustedes, kind of following the theme of usted being formal, ustedes would be also formal. Or I would use this as Latin America. Just think about everybody in Latin America addresses you guys as very formal. It could be you guys, could be y'all, could be you. Just like vosotros, kind of depends on how you decide to directly address multiple people when you do it. Any of these three probably work as translations. So, one last thing that I wanted to cover is the fact that, there's two pronouns for nosotros and nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, ellos and ellas. And what's the difference between those two? Why do they have two? Well, as you may or may not know, Spanish is a gendered language. So what does that mean exactly? Well, being a gendered language essentially means that you use different words to refer to guys versus girls. And so typically the way that Spanish is set up is that anything that ends in an O or in an OS is going to be masculine. So this means guys. And on the other hand, anything that ends in an A or an AS is going to be feminine. So this refers to girls, right? So when we're looking at something, we'll take ellos and ellas. Ellos would mean anytime that I'm saying they, as an example of just a group of guys, right? So if I have, let's say if I'm referring to Carl and Rob, the way that I would address them as they in Spanish, I would say ellos, ellos. Now, if I was referring to a group of girls, I would use ellas right here. So, for example, if I were to say Kate and Shayna, I would say ellas. This is referring to just a group of girls, or if I were to have a bunch of girls, if I wanted to say they, just using ellas. So now let's talk about what's going to happen when we have a mixed group, because you may have already noticed, but there's only two of these, yet you can have mixed groups and refer to people as they. So which one are we going to use? So in Spanish, masculine always dominates the feminine. That's how Spanish was set up, and that's the rule. And so anytime that we have a mixed group at all, if there's at least one guy, that will make it ellos. So for example, if I said Carl and Shayna, the way to refer to them as they, that would be ellos. Now, if I wanted to say Carl, Shayna, and Kate, well, now you can see we have more girls than guys in this group. So that means that it's going to be ellas, right? Because there's more girls now. Nope, that's not how Spanish works. Anytime there's just one guy in the group, it's still going to be ellos. In fact, I really like this example that was given to me by my middle school Spanish teacher, in which he said that you could place 99 girls in one room and one guy, and the way to refer to them would still be ellos. We would say ellos if we wanted to say they. Anytime there's at least one guy, it's going to be ellos. And the same goes for vosotros versus vosotras and nosotros versus nosotras. So that's kind of how subjects work in Spanish. I hope that covered all bases for anything that you need to know. And we're going to start using these a lot when we get into conjugations, which will be coming up. And so this conjugation chart right here is very sacred in Spanish because these are the basic conjugations and the basic subjects. And you can actually take any subjects at all. If you wanted to take, like, let's say for example, Rob and Carl, and you could represent them with all of these subjects right here. That'd be ellos, or if I wanted to say Jacob, I'd refer to him as él, he. If I wanted to say, for example, you guys, and I'm in Latin America, I could refer to that as ustedes. And so this conjugation chart is this subject chart is absolutely sacred. It's going to be used a lot in conjugations. And hopefully this video helped. But yeah, that's it.